Welcome to today's web seminar. Again, my name is Simone Turek. I'm with John Burton Advocates for Youth, and I just want to say that this webinar is going to be used as a training for organizations who are onboarding new staff, who are providing kind of ongoing training opportunities for case managers and others that work with current and former foster youth and homeless youth on applying for financial aid. And so if you're listening to this recording at a later date for training purposes, we want to welcome you as well. And we always go through on our webinars some technical information just about kind of the audio. The best practice here is calling in using your phone. So if you have any audio issues, the best thing to do is to stop listening through your computer speakers and dial in through a phone, and the information is there on the screen. And as always, we also do a question and answer session at the end of the web seminar. So if you have questions throughout the training, please do submit them in your control panel. You just enter them into the questions box, and then you hit send. And then we're going to pause. I'm going to do a little test. We're getting messages saying that people can't hear. If you can hear me, if you can just go ahead and send a message in the questions box, and then we'll know whether we have an audio issue, and if so, we can fix it. Oh, great, so people can hear. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and resume. We thought we were gonna have to start over. So let's pick up where we left off. So we always post our presentation materials and audio on our website, which is jbaforyouth.org, and we put them under the training archive so you can get them there at a later date. And we'll also, of course, send them out to everyone who registered for the webinar later today, along with the PowerPoint. So today's webinar is the first webinar in a two-part training on financial aid. Today's webinar is going to focus on kind of all of the information and steps associated with and leading up to submitting the FAFSA. And then we'll hold a second webinar in March that will focus on everything that happens kind of after you submit the FAFSA, all the way up to how to help you maintain their aid, keep their aid. So today we'll start with some recent changes related to financial aid and kind of why is that information, important to all of you working with current and former foster youth and or homeless youth. Then we'll cover the financial aid process, sources and types of aid, calculating need, cost of attendance, and typical award packages for community colleges and 4 years. Next, we'll go over how and when to apply and highlight the most important things to understand for foster and homeless youth as far as completing the FAFSA. And then lastly, we'll run through some hypothetical scenarios, which is always fun, and go into our Q&A. Now, I mentioned that we're going to go over some key pages of the FAFSA for foster and homeless youth, but I also want to alert you guys of a really great webinar that's coming up. If you want a super in-depth sort of how-to training for how to complete the FAFSA for foster youth, and I mean in-depth as in page by page, every page of the FAFSA, what they should be putting, screen by screen of the entire application, you should participate in this webinar. And it happens to be this coming Monday. My colleague here at JBay, Jessica Petrus, is hosting it, and she will be walking everyone through the FAFSA for foster youth. And it'll be a really great training opportunity. If you have staff who literally, as part of their job, they're sitting down with youth, they're completing the FAFSA with them, and they need to kind of really have a more in-depth understanding of the whole application. And so when I send out later today the recording of this presentation, I'll go ahead and share the link to register for that webinar, in addition to the link to register for the sequel to today's webinar in March that I mentioned. So here to kind of help me work through this ambitious agenda today we're joined by two financial aid experts. I'd like to welcome Tanae McCall. Tanae is a scholarship coordinator and financial aid advisor at CSU Bakersfield. And I'd also like to welcome Marisol Ramirez, and I'm welcoming Marisol back. She actually, 2 years ago, or October 2016, we did a similar webinar, but focused just on foster youth, and she joined us as our panelist. So welcome back, Marisol. She's a financial aid technician, but is also the Guardian Scholars Coordinator and the Foster Youth Success Initiative liaison at Pierce College, which is in the LA Community College District. And again, I'm Simone with John Burton Advocates for Youth. Now, this might go without saying. I'm sure everyone's aware of this, but foster and homeless youth, they're missing this key piece of support for college, which is the parental support. We know that parental income savings and borrowing is the greatest single source of funding used by students to pay for college, and it exceeds all other sources, including grants, scholarships, and student income and savings. So we know that financial aid is critical for foster youth and unaccompanied homeless youth. We also know that when students receive financial aid, they do better in school. As you can see on the screen, students who receive grants and scholarships are more likely to receive a bachelor's degree. And then we do have some foster youth specific data. Students who receive the Chafee grant, which is a grant specifically for foster youth that you'll learn about later, they're 52% more likely to complete 3 or more semesters of community college, and their course completion rate and GPA also improves. And I don't have a slide on this, but unfortunately, a lot of foster youth and homeless youth are not receiving the aid that they're eligible for. We do have a lot of data on this related to foster youth. We have, less data on homeless youth, but we know that homeless youth, we know anecdotally there are significant administrative barriers and hurdles for homeless youth with the financial aid process. And for foster youth, we know that many youth are not receiving the federal Pell Grant or our state's Cal Grant. And really, to break it down for you, a 2015 study found that 80% of foster youth received the Board of Governors fee waiver, which waives enrollment fees at community colleges here in California. However, only about half of foster youth received the Pell Grant. But we know that if youth are eligible for the BOG fee waiver, they're generally going to be eligible for the Pell Grant. So there's something that's off there, right? So here at John Burton Advocates for Youth, we believe that really, seeing progress here will take a combination of smart policy changes, which we've been working with our state legislators on, and also education and information dissemination, reaching the sector. Everyone who's working with young people, really needs to be equipped to assist youth through the financial aid process. So we hope that today all of you can leave here, even better equipped than you were previously to assist current and former foster youth and homeless youth with accessing all the financial aid that they're eligible for, so that they can have really just the best chance possible at succeeding in their post-secondary educational goals. Now, you might wonder kind of why are we doing a webinar on both foster and homeless youth and financial aid? Why aren't we doing maybe 2 separate webinars? And the simple answer is that you really need to have the whole picture. Both populations qualify as independent students on the FAFSA, meaning they don't put their parents' income down on the FAFSA, and that includes foster parents, adoptive parents, and guardians. And it's not incorporated there. There's no parental income incorporated into the equation for determining their eligibility for need-based aid. That's the really important piece. It's critical that we know how to correctly advise youth so that they're getting this independent status that they're eligible for on the FAFSA. And if someone can answer yes to any of the bullets on the slide, basically, they're an independent student. So a student who's 24 or older, who's married, a graduate student, active military duty, a veteran, has dependent children of their own, all independent students. Then you look at the last 3 there on the bottom of the slide, and these are the ones that we'll be talking about today. Foster youth, someone on here, someone who's defined as an orphan, foster child, or ward, or dependent of the court, anytime since the age of 13. A youth who's an emancipated minor or in legal guardianship when he or she reached the age of majority, or an unaccompanied youth who was homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless since July 1st of the award year. And we'll break this down in more detail later, but it's important to kind of understand, as I said, the whole picture here. We often categorize, and it's easy to slip into this, we categorize young people and think about serving them in terms of how we're funded to serve them. So, homeless youth providers who are funded with Runaway and Homeless Youth Act dollars maybe are homeless youth providers, or programs who are providing a foster care placement to youth, or a program for former foster youth, they're foster care providers. But when it comes to financial aid, we really have to reframe a bit and consider the individual circumstance of this young person, as you would as a case manager who's attempting to assist a young person with their life matters. You don't look at them as a funding stream, you look at them as a person. And there are important kind of details and nuances to think about here. For example, homeless youth providers know that, when they learn about the lives and the childhoods of the young adults they work with, many of them have abuse histories. Some of them actually have foster care histories. And although they might not currently be in foster care, they might not have even known they were in foster care. And they might not be eligible for, ILP or other programming for foster youth, but they may still have been in care after 13, which would qualify them for independent status on the FAFSA by way of their foster care history. So why does this matter? Well, if a youth qualifies by way of being a foster youth and a homeless youth, you want them to identify as a foster youth on the FAFSA. You may already know this, or if you don't, you'll learn on the webinar, but foster care status is a one-time verification. Homelessness status is an annual verification. And the process of getting a homelessness determination can be a little less simple than a foster youth verification. So foster youth also have, eligibility for additional aid depending on what age they were in care. And there are significant campus supports for foster youth. So particularly for homeless youth providers, we always want to make sure that we're really checking into whether the young person you're working with may qualify as independent as a foster youth rather than a homeless youth. It's really important, that we understand both sides of this. So moving forward, and are we okay on the audio? Yeah, okay, great. Moving forward here, we're going to go over just a few recent changes related to financial aid that are important for all of you guys to be aware of. So first, some general stuff here, and this is not brand new. This is, a year or so old, but the FAFSA and the DREAM Act and the CHAFEE application are now available starting October 1st of the year prior to the award year, as opposed to January 1st of the award year. This change started in 2016. So this means that the FAFSA for 2018-19 became available last October 2017 instead of this month, January 2018. But of course, just to remind everyone, the priority deadline for submitting the FAFSA is still March 2nd. Don't forget that. And then second, the FAFSA started using what they call prior year data. So instead of using last year's tax returns, those who file taxes and have to submit them for the FAFSA use their returns from 2 years ago. So for 2018-19 academic year, you'd use the 2016 tax returns. So then getting more specific with foster youth, some changes. The first one, very new, Senate Bill 12, authored by Senator Jim Bell, passed last year, which is fantastic. This is a bill that we sponsored with 3 provisions intending to increase access to financial aid and campus support for foster youth. And one of the provisions of the law is that the verification process for verifying foster youth status is going to be automated. So previously, and well, currently until the data matching is set up, foster youth have to get a dependency determination letter, right, to verify that they were in foster care after their 13th birthday. Once the data matching is set up, current and former foster youth will no longer have to get this letter. It eliminates an administrative hurdle for youth, which we love, eliminating administrative hurdles. So now SB 12 went into effect January 1st of this year, 2018, and we're really hoping to see and anticipating to see the data matching capability available by the next academic year, 2018-19. We can't guarantee that, but we're hopeful and think that that's realistic. So next, the 2016-17 state budget, and this is not as new as SB 12, but the 2016-17 state budget included a $3 million expansion to our state's Chafee budget, which added to the existing $11.3 million budget. This has enabled our state to award Chafee grants to many students who were previously not being awarded. So really exciting. And to just remind everyone, the Chafee grant, federally known as the Chafee Education and Training Voucher, is a grant for current and former foster youth, and we'll hear more about it later. And on a related note, also in 2016, Assembly Bill 2506 passed. This was authored by Assembly Member Tony Thurmond. This is also legislation we sponsored, which kind of went hand in hand with the Chafee budget expansion. AB 2506 created some new restrictions for schools with more than 40% of undergraduate students borrowing federal student loans to ensure that students are using their Chafee grants at credible institutions. And I'll talk more about what these restrictions are, or these guidelines are, shortly. But first, I want to talk about some changes related to financial aid for homeless youth. And these are federal changes. So first, the definition of youth has been removed in federal law, and this allows 22-year-olds and 23-year-olds to qualify as independent students. Previously, the U.S. Department of Education had defined youth for purposes of determining who's an unaccompanied homeless youth to include only individuals 21 years or younger. So this definition basically left out the 22 and 23-year-olds because you remember, once you turn 24, you're an independent student. Everyone at 24 is an independent student. So now, there was a way for them to identify as homeless students where if they said yes to the homeless youth question, they were forwarded to a special circumstance category where they could request a homelessness determination from their college. But as you can imagine, this was not simple and often not successful. And so this has now been fixed, and now 22 and 23-year-olds get the same FAFSA questions as the 21 and unders, which you'll learn about on the webinar. Second box on the screen, the three individuals other than a financial aid administrator who are designated as being qualified to provide youth with a homelessness determination used to only be able to do so for youth they worked with currently. So for example, a school district liaison could only provide a determination for youth while they were still in high school, and an RHYA or a HUD-funded housing program director could only make the determination while the youth was in their program. Now there's been a change. If they have the proper information, they can actually make determinations in subsequent years. This is really great because it allows more flexibility for youth to go back to a program they were in the year prior, or go back to their high school and say, hey, as you know, I'm homeless, and help them make that determination so that they don't have to do it through the financial aid office at their school, which you will also learn about in the presentation. So let's jump into Financial Aid 101 to kind of lay a foundation for today's webinar as far as all of the technical financial aid information. I want to start with just the financial aid process. First, you submit the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act, ideally by the priority March 2nd deadline. Then you provide whatever verification documents are being requested to complete your file. Your application is processed, which can take 4 to 6 weeks. You receive your award notification through your student portal, email or letter. You get your disbursement. Disbursement options, vary depending on the college, but generally it will be direct deposit. It could be prepaid debit card or paper check. And then the last piece here that we know is really important is youth have to maintain their aid, which usually means maintaining, satisfactory academic progress and not accruing student debt. And so you have to do this every year. You submit your FAFSA every year that you're going to attend school. And so today, we're just going to talk about this first step, submit the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act. And on the March webinar, we'll go over all of the steps that come after, including how to support youth in maintaining their aid. So I'm going to now pass it over to Tanae to take us through kind of the sources and types of financial aid.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Tanae McCall from CSU Bakersfield. I'm just going to go over the basic sources and types of financial aid that can be offered to students once they complete the FAFSA application. And when we discuss our webinar, it's going to be strictly, we'll be discussing when we say state aid, that's going to be discussing the California aid that we offer through the state of California. So first we have, of course, the state aid, the federal aid, which is like the federal Pell Grant, FAFSAgov grant, and then we have college or universities, which can consist of scholarships and any grants that the school may offer. And then we have the organizations and private companies, again, which can be scholarships. So we have the gift aid, which is, of course, the free aid, which includes the fee waivers. Fee waivers can be third-party payments, fee waivers from um, a student's job, just any waiver that's going to cover their fee, their tuition fee. Then we have grants. So the grants, of course, are funds that do not have to be paid back once coursework is completed. Then there's scholarships, which is part of the gift aid, which because it's the free money. And scholarships can come from outside organizations or within the university or community college. Then we have the work study. Work study is a federal fund. That's where the students, it's part of their award package, but the students are actually working and they're earning a paycheck towards that specific type of aid. Then there's loans, of course loans that are where students, they pretty much pay back once they're completed with school. Next slide. Then this breaks down to the types of aid that cover tuitions for our foster youth and homeless students. So we have the Cal Grant A, which we'll go into detail more what the Cal Grant A is on a couple of slides later. So the Cal Grant A, it's strictly a tuition paying grant. And on here you see where what the CSU offers, which they offer, and this is annual, this is a year amounts that are offered. And we have the UC amounts as well as the private for nonprofit and the private for-profit. Then what we have here for CSUs, we offer something that's called the State University Grant. Again, this is a grant that's offered in the state of California. So there may be other grants in other states that are offered, but so you would have to check with those financial aid offices to see what they offer through their state. But the state of California, we offer something that's called the State University Grant, which covers the tuition fee. It does not cover the entire tuition like the BOG fee waiver. That the BOG fee waiver is offered through community colleges, but the state university fee grant pays for the state university fee, which is applied to a student's tuition that is set by the CSU Chancellor's Office. Then there's the UC grant, of course, which is offered through the UC campuses, and then the Board of Governors fee waiver, which is called the BOG. Next slide. And here is their types of aid that students can receive from once they complete the FAFSA application. We have the Pell Grant, the Pell Grant is a federal grant, and that can be up to $59.20 for the year. So, and the students, they do have a lifetime eligibility. They only receive 600% maximum that they can receive the Pell Grant. Usually that gives them the full 4 years, sometimes fifth year, if they need the fifth year to complete school. Then there's a federal FAFSAgov grant, and the FAFSAgov grant varies. I'll go into more detail on what it looks like, but our FAFSAgov here we offer, it's about $300 per semester, so that's $600 for the year. And in order to be eligible for the FAFSAgov grant, the students have to be eligible for Pell Grant, and which normally in a foster youth or homeless youth situation, they are eligible for Pell Grant. So then more than likely they will be eligible for that FAFSAgov grant. Then we have the Cal Grant B access portion. Cal Grant B actually has two parts. There's Cal Grant B access and there's Cal Grant B fees. However, how it works is, and Cal Grant is only part is the state of California. So Cal Grant B fee portion usually comes the second year of their schooling when they attend a four-year university. So their first year, they're only receiving that Cal Grant B access. And then the second year, they can roll into receiving both the access and the fee portion as long as they maintain their eligibility to receive Cal Grant. Cal Grant C is something that's at community colleges and then the vocational trade schools. Then we have the institutional grants again that can be like we offer various grants here for students. We have the Guardian Scholars, which can provide a grant for our foster youth and homeless students. Then there's other grants like within the institution where students actually apply and can receive. Then again, there's the work study. The work study is that students actually earning a paycheck, and then you have your direct loans. Your subsidized can range from anywhere from $3,500 to $5,000, and those So first year freshmen will receive 3,500, sophomore increases by 1,000, and then junior senior year it goes up to that 5,500 max. And then you have the unsubsidized, which is up to 6,000. And in addition to these types of aid, the students can also be eligible for the Chafee grant, where the Chafee grant is, of course, is a California through, because they apply through California Student Aid Commission. So that's another California grant where students may be eligible to receive in addition. Next slide. So here's the Cal Grant. So I'm going to discuss the Cal Grant A and B, and then Marisol is going to discuss C because that deals more with her institution, because it deals more with community colleges. So Cal Grant A and B are both entitlement grants, and again, these are California grants that are offered through the state of California. So with Cal Grant A, you have to maintain certain and have certain GPAs in order to receive these. Cal Grant A, you have to at least have a 3.0 or higher. And Cal Grant B is at least a 2.0 or higher. So when they are seniors in high school, how the process works, it takes 2 applications. Of course, it takes their FAFSA application, which is available each year for October 1st. And then their high school counselor submits their GPA electronically in order to be eligible for Cal Grant. So it takes 2. They have to make sure that FAFSA is in by March the 2nd, and they have to make sure their high school counselor submits their GPA to California Student Aid Commission by March the 2nd in order to be eligible for either of the Cal Grants. Once the March 2nd deadline passes, they can still be eligible for Cal Grant, but it just becomes more competitive, meaning more than likely their chances are going to be lower than receiving it. So they have to make sure that their high school counselor, they communicate with them and make sure that they submit that GPA by March the 2nd. Next slide.
Hello, good morning, everyone. This is Marisol from Pierce College. I would like to refer back to the previous slide just for a bit. I just want to let you know that for community colleges, there is a second deadline, which is September 2nd, and that's for Cal Grant B and C only. Once the March 2nd deadline passes, the Cal Grant B and C become competitive. This means that the grant will be awarded to those students who have a higher GPA and a lower income. So to be awarded, you need to be aware that only one school has the name of the student in their list. This is usually the first school enlisted on their FAFSA. The student can make corrections and indicate what school he or she is attending by going to the Web Grants for Students website. And the DREAM Act application must be submitted by March 2nd. That one does not have a second deadline. So those students who are completing the DREAM Act must complete it by March 2nd. Next slide. The Chafee Education and Training Voucher, which is also known as the ETV, it's a federally funded program, and it's administered by the California Student Aid Commission here in California. It gives up to $5,000 to eligible former students, and they can use the money for career and technical training or college courses. The Chafee can be used for living expenses, transportation, rent, etc. And in order for students to qualify for this grant, they need to be current or former foster youth. They need to be dependent or aware of the court in place in foster care at any time between ages 16 and 18, not have reached their 22nd birthday as of July 1st of the award year. In order to determine the remain eligibility for Chafee, a student must maintain satisfactory academic progress, which is usually a 2.0 GPA, and must be enrolled in at least 6 units. Students who are Teen Gap Youth, Adopted Youth, Guardian Placement, and Voluntary Placement may not be eligible for the Chafee grant unless the court dependence was present at any time between ages 16 and 18. Next.
Thank you, Marisol. And so we're going to just continue on to talk about Chafee and Cal Grant. I'm just going to talk about this one slide and then pass it back over to you. But we've got some messages just saying that people are having some trouble hearing us. So I'm going to make an effort to definitely speak up, and I'm hoping that Tanae and Marisol, you can as well. I think we all need to maybe speak up and slow down because I think the audio appears to be skipping a little bit when we don't. So as I mentioned, these standards earlier, for Chafee, they were created by AB 2506, but they've been in place for the Cal Grant for a number of years. And for institutions with more than 40% of undergraduate students borrowing federal student loans, there are standards that have to be met in order for students to use their Cal Grant or their Chafee Grant at these schools. And I want to be clear about this. All public institutions, so UCs, CSUs, and community colleges here in California are eligible schools because they aren't more than 40% of undergraduate students borrowing federal student loans at these schools. So these standards do not have to be met by those public schools. But for the non-public school, the private schools, the vocational, for profits, and those types of schools, they have to have a graduation rate above 30%, and they have to have a 3-year cohort default rate below 15.5%. And that's just the rate at which students are defaulting on their federal loans. So the idea is that obviously we don't want students going to schools where they aren't going to graduate and or where they are going to get into debt and can't pay that debt back. And if you have a student who's planning on attending a vocational school or a private school, you can check CSAC's website to see if it's an eligible school. There's a list and there's also a search engine you can use, and the URL for that site is on the screen. And I'll just clarify, this is state legislation. This is not a federal law, this is a state law. And so if you're on the webinar from another state, this is not, this is for California. So Marisol, I'm passing it back over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to explain what the definition of need means. Each school has its own cost of attendance. Some follow the state guidelines and some follow the federal guidelines. But basically, the cost of attendance is a calculation of those expenses the student will have when attending a school. Some of the expenses are tuition, housing, book supplies, etc. Then we have the expected family contribution, or the EFC. The EFC is a number or the amount given to the schools once the student completed the FAFSA. The EFC amount is determined based on the income, assets, household size, etc. And this is pretty much the amount that the student is able to contribute towards the school expenses or cost of attendance. Based on those two numbers, the school then determines which grants the students are eligible for based on the remaining need. And need-based aid are Cal Grant, Pell Grant, FAFSAgov, Chafee, subsidized loans, box fee waivers, and some scholarships. Therefore, the lower the EFC, the more the student receives, the more aid the student will receive. So this formula will be the cost of attendance minus expected family contribution equals to the remaining need. Next slide. I'm sorry.
Okay,
sorry, this is Tanae.
It's me. So for the, I'm just going to go over a cost of attendance for a CSU. This is just a typical cost of attendance. We have, again, the tuition fee, which we have three. We have it at home with parent budget, we have on campus, or we have off campus. When I say, I'll kind of go back and forth between cost of attendance and budget because they're both the same thing. So we have the three. So a typical at home with parent, you have your tuition, and your tuition fee is the same across all three. Tuition fee and your book and supplies are the same across all three budgets. So we have tuition fee, which can be $71.46, and this is for the year. So then we have the book and supplies, which is $19.48. We have the housing meals, which is $52.47. And I'm going to go through the difference with the three. That's because you see the off-campus and on-campus is extremely high compared to at home with parent budget. We have transportation, which is $15.65, and then the personal, which can consist of like the personal items they may need, paper, books, things of that sort, and pens and pencils. So we have that personal budget of $14.50. So at home with parent budget will consist of 17,356, and what that means, we provide the student that budget, and the budgets are set based on what the student has put on their FAFSA, because on the FAFSA application they list they're going to be at home with parent on campus or off campus. So that's where we come up with, we assign the budget to the student based on what they put on the FAFSA application. So that's a budget for with parent is at 17,356. What we do with that budget is the budget actually gives any institution, that's where you actually award. So the student's package is based on what their budget is for the year. Then we have the on campus and off campus. So the big things with those two are the housing and meals, of course, because your on campus is our students. We have dorms here, so it's a student that lives in the dorms, and how it works is when they live in the dorms, they have to select certain meal plans. So with that particular budget area, we provide them the housing as in addition to their meals that they have to select. Off campus, it's the similar situation. They're living off campus and they have to purchase their own meals. So that's where that difference comes in with those two, especially for the on campus, because the meal plans can be a little bit high, and the housing is definitely higher when living on campus. So then you see their two budgets. They have the on campus is 25,227, then off campus is 25,129. So we take those budgets again, and then we award based on what their budget is. Next slide. So this is a typical award package for the CSU student. Um, Again, you have the cost of attendance, which is at 25,227, and which is their EFC, which is their estimated family contribution. So there's a zero. The lower that number, the better they will have a better package. So they have a total need again of their cost of attendance, which is 25. So their aid could consist of the state university grant, again, which is a California grant, and they have the Cal Grant B, the federal Pell Grant, the federal SCLG grant, the work study. Now the work study is shown on here like it pays out as part of their financial aid, but it actually does not. The federal work study is a program where the students, it's part of their award package. However, they are actually earning a paycheck each month for that particular money that they're assigned. So this particular student has $1,000 per semester that they can work up to. So each month they can earn a paycheck, 200, 300, but once they reach that 1,000 max, either the student is they're going to be done working, or there's sometimes where the schools can increase that work study just depending on if the funding is there, because work study is it has limited funding that they offer from the federal government. And then there's a Chafee grant. So the Chafee again is a California state, and that's where they apply through the California CSAC website. So with those two semesters together, they have a total package of 15,192 that a student may receive, minus the 2,000, of course, because again, that federal work study, they're actually earning a paycheck. And that state university grant, the student never receives that. It goes strictly towards part of their tuition, which is the state university fee that's charged by all the CSU campuses. Next slide.
Thanks, Tanae. So I think now we are going to have Maisel walk us through cost of attendance and typical award package for community college.
Yes, so for the community college, we only have two costs of attendance. One is the at home and the off campus. We don't have housing in community college, therefore we don't have on campus budgets. Pretty much our budget for at home and off campus is the same except for the room and board. And that's because obviously students don't live with parents, so they will have to pay more money on rent. The difference between the total of the at home and off campus is huge. As you can see, at home, the budget is 12,695, and off campus is 20,606. And it is important here that we tell our students, especially like the foster youth and the homeless, that they will select off campus when they are completing FAFSA. It is important to select off campus, and that's because it's gonna give them a bigger room to get more grants. As we can see in the next slide, we're gonna see the different type of grants that the student may qualify for. to attend to a community college. So here we can see that the student qualifies for the fee waiver. That is to pay their tuition. This money is not money that student is going to receive. That's why it says total zero. This is just the amount that the state is going to pay the school for the student's tuition. The student can also receive the Cal Grant B, which is going to be 1,672 per year. Um, there is another Cal Grant B for full-time students. Those students who are enrolled in 12 units, they receive extra $500 per semester. The federal Pell Grant will be up to 5,920 per academic year. The FAFSAgov here in community college, we give them $200 per semester, and students can get up to 2,000 per semester in federal work study to work on campus. The other grant that they can get, excuse me, is the Chafee grant, which is a total of $5,000. So the total need that the student can receive is 17,992 per academic year. And this is why it is important for students to select off campus when they apply for FAFSA. If they select with parents or at home, even though they're living with their foster parents, their student is going to receive a lower budget, and they're going to miss either, most likely, the work study experience, the grant, and they will miss the work study experience to work on campus. Um, we will give them the federal grants first and then the state grants. But since the work study is a grant that students need to work for, we will give them the Chafee grant first. So please make a note that it is important for students to select off campus when they're completing their FAFSA. Students can also be eligible for loans, which is not something that we promote. We would not like our students to get loans, but the students can get subsidized loans, which are loans that do not, um, they don't have to pay interest until they graduate. So students can qualify between $3,500 and $4,500 in student loans. Next.
Thanks, Marisol. So I'm passing it back over to Tanae to cover a couple slides before we jump into the FAFSA application.
We definitely want to talk about deadlines because deadlines are always important when it comes to completing the FAFSA and the Cal Grant application. So a very important deadline is March the 2nd, of course, big March the 2nd, because students, they complete that application before the March the 2nd deadline. And that's the priority deadline. Let me go back. So that's the priority deadline because they can still complete the FAFSA after. However, we push the March 2nd priority deadline because students are eligible for the free money before anyone else. So March the 2nd is very important. And it's always, I talk to a lot of high school students here, and I always, grow them with the March the 2nd deadline because that's when I said, if you want the free money, get the application in before that, which is very important. And that includes the Cal Grant. So like I said, if they're current seniors, you want to make sure their high school counselors submit that GPA before March the 2nd. Any of the this is for California schools. So you want to make sure the high school counselors submit that their GPA before March the 2nd, as well as the student completing the FAFSA application before the March the 2nd, because it puts them in categories where they can receive the free money. For example, the Cal Grant A or B, the State University Grant, which is, again, California. These are all California grants. And then you have the UC grants, then, of course, your Chafee grant. Again, Chafee grant, even though that's a separate application, that's through California Student Aid Commission, you want to make sure your students get that application submitted by March the 2nd as well. And you have to remember that it's important, and I always tell students, because a lot of students, once they start college, they forget that they have to renew that FAFSA or their DREAM Act application every year. So that's what I tell a lot of our students. So you guys want to make sure that they're submitting and renewing their FAFSA application and DREAM Act every academic year between October 1st and March the 2nd of the upcoming year. And then what happens is the federal government also sends students their email, just reminding them, hey, it's time to renew your FAFSA application. So you just want to make sure the students remember to renew both applications, their FAFSA and their DREAM Act application. Next slide. So these are things that students need to consider when they're applying to the four-year schools. And again, that March 2nd, I can't stress that enough. Completing your application before March 2nd, early is always better, especially when working with housing deadlines, because for some CSU campuses, ours isn't as big as some CSU campuses allow students to make payment arrangements, work on getting them deposits in order to apply to the housing. Sometimes they have priority housing applying to the housing here on our campus. So that's why it's very important to look for deadlines, because your housing is always going to have deadlines because they either max out on allowing students to live in the dorms, or they just set deadlines and waiting for later students to apply and come in. So again, you have to look for those housing deadlines. And then the institutional grants. So the institutional grants vary across each of the CSU campuses and even the UC campuses. And when we say institutional grants, it can be like we offer here various grants that teachers apply for and then they award to students. So when students see those, the earlier you apply, the more the chances you'll be receiving that grant. And sometimes the grant can pay full tuition plus books and plus your living expenses. So it just depends on that grant and what they're offering. Again, that's scholarships. I can't stress that enough. Like here at our school, and this is at any campus, you have to always check and see what their deadline is for applying for scholarships, because like ours, we put ours in sync with the FAFSA application. Our priority deadline is March the 2nd. And the reason why we do that, because it gives the committees time to meet and select recipients, usually around April. So again, you need to look for the deadlines at different institutions and see what their scholarship deadlines are. And every scholarship, majority of scholarships are going to offer, institutions are going to offer scholarships. So always check on schools and see what they're offering. And another is the delay of enrollment in housing deposits, which I kind of touched on. We do offer where students, when they don't have the full funding or they're waiting for their financial aid to cover their tuition plus their housing, our housing department does allow where they kind of hold the students' housing and they hold everything until their financial aid comes through. The housing deposit here at our institution is a little different. They kind of want that up front so they know for sure you're going to be living in the dorms, and they kind of hold your spot. And usually how that works is housing deposit is kind of like an upfront thing for our students, but we have programs here at our institution that helps cover the cost of the student's housing deposit, because their financial aid is not going to make it in time to hold that room for them. So we have a program called Guardian Scholars that helps to cover the cost of the housing deposits for students, incoming students. And then each school has foster youth program coordinators to help them, to guide them and make sure that they have the resources and make sure that they can meet all these deadlines. And I know we have ours here. We have a couple of guardian scholars, counselors here at our institution, as well as our local high schools. They have a lot of foster youth coordinators within the high school districts here that help the students make sure they meet these deadlines and connect them with individuals at universities to make sure that they're going to be okay and on their way to the next step. Next slide.
So thank you, Tanae. And now we're going to pass it back to Marisol to kind of walk us through a few pages in the FAFSA. This is, in no way even close to what we will get at on I mentioned the webinar on Monday, which will take you page by page through the entire application. But we'll do a few introductory pages and then kind of the key pages for foster and homeless youth that are really important to be familiar with. Marisol, are you maybe muted?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hello, everyone, again. I'm going to talk about how to apply for FAFSA. For FAFSA, you need to go to the FAFSAgov website, and students will need to create an FAFSA ID, which is their username and a password. This FAFSA ID are going to be using for every, from now on. Once they create an FSA ID, they will use it to make corrections. They will use it to apply for the following year. So it is important that students um, save their username and password because they will use it again. In this case, it's a student and parent. In this case, our students are going to qualify to be independent, so they won't need their parent's signature or FSA ID, which is the electronic signature in this case. The students also either complete the FAFSA application or the DREAM Act application. In California, we have the DREAM Act application for those students who are undocumented, AB 540, or DACA students. So AB 540 are those, it's a law that allows students who were in high school in California for the last 3 years of the high school and graduated from a California high school, those students will be able to pay in-state tuition, meaning those the same tuition that California residents pay. Now, because this law is for those students who completed 3 years in high school and graduated from high school in California, we will have those students who are U.S. citizens or U.S. residents, and they move to another state after they graduated from high school, and then they came back to California to live again. Because this law, it's the requirement is 3 years in high school and graduation from a high school in California, they will also be eligible for this law. So that means they don't have to pay out of state tuition once they come back. Um, these students do not complete the DREAM Act application. If they are U.S. citizens or if they are U.S. residents, they will complete the FAFSA application. It's only for them not to pay out of state tuition because they went out of California and then they came back. That's an important note for the AB 540 students. Also, the DACA students receive a Social Security number. However, that number is only a work permit. That Social Security number allows them to work in the U.S., but does not allow them to receive federal aid. Therefore, they cannot apply for FAFSA. They will have to complete the DREAM Act application. Next slide. Okay, this is the page that the students will see as soon as they go into the FAFSA.gov. So it says start a new FAFSA. If the students have never completed a FAFSA before, they will click on start a new FAFSA. If the student has completed FAFSA before or completed the FAFSA, they go to login. And this is because the FAFSA already has their information saved. They will have to only complete certain information. And then this website will take them into the create an FSA ID. If the student does not have an FSA ID, if this is the first time the student is applying for financial aid, the system will automatically take them into creating an FSA ID. Like I said, this is their electronic signature. This is how the student is going to sign at the end of the application and submit the application. The student would use an email account that have access now, and they will send a secure code. So all this, the system is going to make sure that the person who is creating the FSA ID is actually the student. And for that, they will send a secure code to their email, and then they will have to put the code on their FSA ID. Next. Okay, so right now we're working with two FAFSAs. One is for Fall 2017. They still need to complete the 2017-2018 FAFSA because summer is part of this academic year. The the fall semester is always going to be the first semester of the academic year. Therefore, for fall 2018, the student needs to complete the 2018-2019 FAFSA. Next slide. Okay, this was added about 2 to 3 years ago to the FAFSA. This is usually now at the beginning of the application. There is a question that says, are you foster youth or were you at any time in the foster care system? And the reason for this question at almost the beginning of the application is because there are different type of eligibilities for students to become independent. And one of them is age. And the second one is marriage. And the third one is if the student has dependents. So once the student answered yes to any of those questions, they do not have the opportunity to answer yes that they were in the foster care system. So these students were missing a lot of different grants that we have here on campus and off campus. So by adding this question at the beginning of the application, we now have a code on the FAFSA that indicates that that student, regardless of the age, if they are over 24 now, we know that that student was at one point in the foster care system. And this is how those students, like I mentioned, if they're independent for any other reason, now we're going to be able to know who they are and we're going to be able to offer those resources. Next. Okay, so here is a series of questions that make a student independent. As you can see at the beginning, it asks them if they were born before January 1st of a certain year. If they answer yes to all these questions prior to coming to question 53, which is the first question in the red box, the students will become independent for that reason and did not have the opportunity to answer yes. However, if the students are under 24, not married, have no dependents, they're going to answer no to all those questions, and they're going to get to the
Marisol. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I think you meant to say if they answer yes to any of the questions. You said all of them. So I just wanted to clarify to not make it confusing that if they answer yes to any of the questions, for not all of the questions.
Yeah, well, I guess what I meant to say is if they answer no to the questions prior, then they will have the opportunity to answer yes.
Yes. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify because I know we'll get questions about that. Okay.
Okay. So then the student will answer yes to question 53 if they were considered aware of the court after age 13. Once they answer yes to this question, again, they will not see the questions after that because this is making them independent. Making them independent means do not need to provide parental information. If the student answers no to that question, then it comes to the guardianship question. Does someone other than your parents or step-parents have legal guardianship of you as determined by the court of the state? And this needs to be determined by the court. There's some students that have brought letters indicating that my parent gave the rights to my aunt, but it was not determined by the court. So this is important to make note that if it was not by the court, the student cannot answer yes to this question. And then it comes the homeless youth question. So on or after July 1st, 2017, were you homeless or were you self-supported and at risk of being homeless? If the student answered yes, then the student later in the financial aid office is going to create a code and the student will have to determine, will have to bring proof of being homeless. And I believe Simone is going to go over this.
Yes. Next. Thank you, Marisol, for walking us through this. So just I want to back up because this kind of frames the rest of the webinar here. You know, this section, the dependency status section is really important, obviously, to understand. But definitely, I'm just going to back up here. The student demographics section, where it asks, you know, are you a foster youth or were you at any time in the foster care system? It's really important, even if the youth is identifying as a foster youth in the dependency status section, that they also check this here. It's important because they, if for some reason they went to the dependency status section and say they have dependent children, so they said yes to to that question, they're not going to see the rest of the questions here, because as Marisol pointed out, they're going to ask you these questions in the dependency status section one by one until you answer yes to one. You might not, if no one ever answers yes to one, they'll go no all the way down the line, keep pushing through the FAFSA. But once you answer yes to one, you stop getting these questions because you've been identified now as an independent student. So let's say you say yes, or yes, I'm married. You're not going to get down to that foster youth question. So it's really important that youth identify as foster youth in the student demographic section if they were ever in foster care. So then the dependency status section, obviously, if they answer yes to one of these questions, they're considered an independent student. And this last question here that Marisol mentioned, the on or after July 1st, of the award year, were you homeless or were you self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? We really need to break this down a little further. So I want to, before we do that, just want to kind of pause on these screenshots of the FAFSA. And just a reminder, what does it mean to have independent status on the FAFSA? It means that youth do not have to provide any information, including income information, about biological, adoptive, or foster parents, and that includes relative or non-relative caregivers or legal guardians in the parent demographic section. They don't have to add that information. So, who can answer yes to these questions? So we know that on the left there, the question about foster youth, anyone in care after turning 13 would be, the current and former foster youth that can identify as independent. So, if you're on the call here from California and you have a THP Plus FC or a THP Plus program, all of your youth should be answering yes. If you work with youth in ILP, all of your youth should be answering yes. If you work with a youth who was in foster care after turning 13, they should answer yes to this. But what is the definition of homeless youth for the purposes of the FAFSA? On the right here, this is a little less black and white than the foster youth definition, right? So youth who are unaccompanied and homeless, according to the McKinney-Vento definition, which we'll go over in just a moment, or who are unaccompanied and at risk of being homeless. So let's break this down just a little further. So unaccompanied means not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So this means if a youth is homeless with their family or, with a parent, say they're homeless, they're living with their mom, they're with their mom, but they're homeless together in the custody of their parent, they're not considered an independent student. They have to be unaccompanied. Don't worry, if they're homeless with their family, they will still likely qualify for a lot of need-based aid because their parents' income is probably little to nothing, which means that their expected family contribution would be very small or non-existent, but they wouldn't qualify as an independent student. So unaccompanied and homeless, according to the definition in the McKinney-Vento Act, which the definition is lacking fixed, regular, and adequate housing. So there's that unaccompanied and homeless, or unaccompanied and at risk of being homeless. And that is defined as when a student's housing may cease to be fixed, regular, and adequate. And an example is just a student who's being evicted and has been unable to find fixed, regular, and adequate housing. That would be considered at risk. And just to clarify, and this is on the screen there, but the application and verification guide for financial aid administrators says that a student living in any of these situations who's fleeing an abusive parent may be considered homeless, even if the parent would provide support and a place to live. So that's important to remember. And then the next slide, I won't read this all out. I know there's a lot of words there, but we wanted you to have this, it just lists out in more detail what the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless children and youth includes. I do want to draw your attention to the first bullet to make a clarification. It says that youth who are sharing housing due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason are considered homeless. But I want to clarify, they still have to meet the rest of the definition. So they still must lack a fixed residence. So this is just basically clarifying that couch surfing is considered homeless. This is not saying that every college student who is hard up for money, who has crammed many people into one apartment and they're all living together qualifies as homeless. That's not what that's saying. It's saying that a youth who lacks fixed and regular housing and is couch surfing, is considered homeless. They don't have to be living on the street to be considered homeless, right? So to kind of resume our our walk through the dependency status section of the FAFSA, you recall that in the last question there was that last question about whether the youth was homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. Well, if you answer yes to that question because you meet the definition we just ran through, these 3 additional questions appear. And these are basically asking about whether any of the 3 people mentioned in the questions can verify your status as a homeless youth, which is called, making a homelessness determination. So these 3 people here, we've put on the next slide in these boxes so we can talk about this. These are the 3 people other than a financial aid administrator that can make a homelessness determination for a student. So under the McKinney-Vento Act, so starting with on the left in the dark blue box, under the McKinney-Vento Act, every local education agency must designate a liaison for homeless students to ensure that homeless students are identified and that school personnel receive training and ensure students are informed of their rights and services that they're eligible for, and they can make homeless youth determinations. So, at the high school, there's a liaison. That person can make a determination. Also, next box over, the director or a designee of an RHYA funded shelter, so a Runaway and Homeless Youth Act funded shelter or transitional living program, TLP, can make a determination. And then on the last box, the director or designee of a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, so a HUD funded shelter or transitional housing program, can make a determination. So as you can imagine, if you're an RHYA or a HUD funded shelter or a transitional living or housing program, because I know some of you are definitely on the webinar today, if you aren't already versed in how to provide this determination, this would be key for you to know, right? And on the March webinar, we'll go through what this process looks like of actually providing that verification and suggest some sample verification letters that some homeless youth advocacy organizations have developed that seem to work well. But for now, it's understanding that you can play this role and knowing how to advise youth on what to put on the FAFSA. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this is really important. Although these individuals could previously only make determinations for youth they were currently working with, they can now make designations in or determinations in subsequent years. So for example, the local school district liaison could only make a determination for a current high school student previously, but now they can actually make a determination for a student who has left the high school and is coming back and saying, I need another determination, if they have the necessary information to do so. Similarly, a shelter provider could only make a determination previously for, a current resident, but this has changed. The youth that, who used to be in their shelter can come back and say, are you able to make another determination for me this year? Because homeless youth have to verify every year. And so if they have the necessary information to do so, they can now do that. So what happens if you're an unaccompanied homeless youth, but you have no one to make the determination? So you can't, for some reason, go back to your high school, or the liaison at your high school is not, agreeing to make this determination for you, or you've never been in a housing program. So, first, obviously, we strongly suggest trying to assist youth with obtaining this verification. So if you think that the youth can go back to their high school and get it from their liaison, or they were formerly in a housing program, one of the ones that we mentioned, that would be ideal. Because if you don't answer yes to one of these questions, then you have to go visit the financial aid office, and the financial aid administrator has to make the determination. And there's just a lot more discretion there. So it will really vary from school to school what their process is. Some will conduct an interview with the student, and then some will actually require third-party information. And they have in the law, they can do either. So if you answer yes to being an unaccompanied homeless youth or unaccompanied and at risk of homelessness, but then you answer no to the 3 determination questions, then you should contact the financial aid office at the college that the youth plans to attend, so that the financial aid administrator can meet with the youth to make the determination. Really important. And then just some things, and we'll kind of go into some of these things I think in more detail in March, but a few things to remember. If the financial aid administrator is making the determination and there's no written documentation available, like I said, the determination may be based on a documented interview with the student. So the financial aid advisor is not required to get a third-party verification. You know, they absolutely can do this without that, but they can request it and require it if it's up to their discretion. So if they choose to, they can. So that's why I think it's just, you know, to reiterate, it's easier to go and get this determination from, you know, the the school liaison or the RHY or HUD program. And now financial aid administrators are instructed by the U.S. Department of Education to determine if the student is unaccompanied and homeless or at risk of being so, without regard for why the student is homeless. So just so you kind of know going into this, like, what is this going to be for the student? They're you know, they are not instructed to determine kind of the details about why the student is homeless, what is their family history. It's really just whether they are homeless or not. They are also told, the financial aid administrators, that if a student receives a determination from a local liaison or an RHY funded or HUD funded shelter or transitional living program, that the financial aid administrator must accept this determination, even if they disagree with it. So this is important to remember. If you provide a determination, or your youth has a determination that's been provided to them by one of those three people, the financial aid administrator can't say, I actually don't believe this, or I don't agree with it. If it's been provided, they must accept it. And then just a clarification there, a student living in the school dorm may be considered an unaccompanied homeless youth if the student would otherwise be homeless. Another important thing to remember is just that a new determination must be made each year for the FAFSA, like we said. And to note, you know, this definition is of homelessness, and kind of the way this all works is different for qualifying for priority registration for homeless youth. So I just want to mention that many of you know that in California, homeless youth are eligible for priority registration, and that process and verification process is different than this one that we're talking about for financial aid. On the March webinar, we'll go into more detail on verification for both foster and homeless youth. So I want to do a time check here. We're going to run through two hypothetical scenarios. I think we're going to skip the second one. So first, I'm just going to ask Tanae to run us through this first scenario here to kind of test our knowledge of it.
Okay, so we have Sienna here. And with Sienna, she was in foster care until the age 14 when she reunified with her mother. Her mother subsequently relapsed and lost her housing. Sienna has been on her own since 17 and is now 18 and living in a shelter off and on. So here are the questions. Is Sienna considered an independent student on the FAFSA? And if so, which question would Sienna would be advised to answer in order to indicate her independent status? So the answer would be, of course, she would be an independent student on her FAFSA, and she actually meets both the foster care and the homeless youth categories. However, it would be better for her to answer that, indicating that she's a foster youth after her 13th birthday. The reason why is because it's the foster care, you have to, with both situations, homeless and foster, because again, you can say she can answer both, yes to both questions, but it's better for her to answer yes to the foster youth question because it only has to be verified once, which that means. So she puts, for example, she's attending CSU Bakersfield. She puts she's in the foster care system. So she will be selected for verification, that's after completing the FAFSA. So from there, she'll have to provide proof of her foster care situation. So she'll provide court documents, and then that'll be just verified that one time. So when she goes to renew her FAFSA with us again for the upcoming school year, she won't have to provide those documents again. So that's why it would be better for her to answer that, yes, she was part of the foster care system on her FAFSA application. Whereas with the homeless youth, she would be required to provide us documentation every year she completes that FAFSA. So she would have to always go to her a homeless youth liaison and provide that paperwork so we can verify her situation again. But again, so with her, she would, of course, answer that she was a part of the foster care system and she would have to be verified that one time, the first time. Next slide.
Thank you, Tanae. So we're actually going to skip Joaquin. Sorry, Marisol, I know you were going to do this one, but for the interest of time, we're going to skip to Michelle and finish our hypotheticals, and then move into a few resources and then our Q&A. So in this scenario, Michelle was removed from her mother at birth and kind of bounced around to various placements. Sorry, I'm not able to view my screen here, for the first 2 years of her life. And then she reunified with her father at age 5. So her foster care case was closed at age 5. And then later on, things changed. She ended up living with an aunt as a teenager, but she never went back into the foster care system. So her case was never reopened. So her case was closed at 5, but she kind of continued to bounce around with relatives. At age 16, Michelle's aunt passed away, and since then, she's been couch surfing with friends. So is Michelle considered an independent student on the FAFSA? And if so, which question should she be advised to answer yes to in order to indicate her independent status? So you see the answer there. Yes, Michelle is eligible for independent status on the FAFSA. She should answer yes to the question indicating she was a homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless as of July 1st of the award year. A few important things to also note here. Although Michelle cannot answer yes to the foster youth dependency question, she should still answer yes to the earlier question in the student demographics section that asks if you were in foster care at all. Because again, there are things that she, may qualify for, or that may be available to her on her campus, that if she doesn't answer yes to that, they won't know that she has had a foster care history. So she would answer yes to the homeless youth question in the dependency section, and then she would answer, yes to the foster youth question just in the student demographics section. And then another thing to note, if Michelle is connected to the homeless liaison at her high school or a qualified RHYA or HUD funded program, she can obviously answer yes to one of those individuals making her homelessness determination. But just a reminder that if she, for some reason, was not able to connect with any of those 3 entities, like she's never been in a program or she somehow can't connect with her high school liaison, she should visit the financial aid office at her school to have her homeless status verified by the financial aid administrator. So a few resources here. I'm not going to go into detail. You can see what this is, and when I send it out, you'll have access to these. I do want to highlight one thing. We just, at the end of last year, released a financial aid guide for California foster youth. It's a super helpful guide for youth, and it's accessible there. And you'll get that, like I said, when I send this out. And then a few suggestions on just where you can go for support with the FAFSA. I just want to go over one thing just to clarify here. The one that says high school counselor, foster youth liaison, school district homeless liaison, if the youth is in high school, school counselors have these new specific responsibilities related to higher education and homelessness. So the Every Student Succeeds Act amended the McKinney-Vento Act so that school counselors are now required to advise, prepare, and improve the readiness of all youth experiencing homelessness for college. And then the foster youth liaison and the homeless youth liaison with the district are also a resource. The school district liaisons have new specific FAFSA responsibilities as well for homeless youth. They're now required to inform unaccompanied homeless youth of their status as independent students for college, financial aid, and help them obtain assistance to receive verification for the FAFSA. So that's important to remember. So now I'd really love to just move into Q&A. We have so many great questions that have been submitted. And so Marisol and Tanae, I'm gonna, between the 3 of us, I'm going to pitch some questions and we can answer them. So the first one is, what does entitlement grant mean? So this is a great question. I'm going to pass this off. Tanae, do you want to take this one?
Hello. Oh, sure. I'm sorry. Thought I lost my. So an entitlement grant just means it's, of course, the student has to, again, apply through the FAFSA in order to be eligible for entitlement grants. And it means,
I think they're asking about, sorry, I should have been a little more specific.
Are they Yeah,
They're
because it
asking
can
about
mean
the Cal Grant. They're asking about, like, can you explain what is the entitlement Cal Grant? Like, how does that work, and how can you guarantee getting an entitlement grant? Cal
okay.
Grant.
So of course, again, the Cal Grant is a state California state grant, and it's in order to be eligible for it. Again, it includes you have to complete the FAFSA application, and then you have to have your high school counselor submit that GPA electronically. And there's three parts of the Cal Grant. So there's Cal Grant A, and with the Cal Grant A, I'll break it down this way, maybe they'll understand better. Cal Grant A, in order to be eligible for Cal Grant A, you have to have that GPA of 3.0 or higher, and you also have to fall within the EFC qualifications, which I'm not sure exactly what that EFC number is, but usually Cal Grant A is for those students that have a 3.0 or higher and usually fall within a higher EFC number on that FAFSA application. So then you have the Cal Grant B, which Cal Grant B, again, like I said, has two portions. It has a Cal Grant B fee portion, which is that covers fees, and again, that's usually for students that's going into their second year of attending college. So, and then with that one covers part of their their tuition fees, similar to the state university grant. Then the other part of B is the Cal Grant Access, and with both, to be eligible for both of those, that's usually with the lower EFC and a 2.0 or higher GPA. Cal Grant C, I'm going to let Marisol talk more about that because we don't really deal with that here at the university.
I think we're actually just, the person just wanted to understand kind of maybe like the March 2nd deadline issue. You know, if they miss the March 2nd deadline, can they qualify for the entitlement later? Because there's a follow-up question here. Can they qualify for the entitlement grant later? And I know the answer to that is no. That they have to apply by the March 2nd deadline in order to land that entitlement grant.
Yes, because Cal Grant is real strict with their March 2nd deadline. So if you don't have the application in or GPA submitted by March 2nd, then you're not going to receive it.
Hi, this is Amy Lemley, and
it looks like people aren't able to hear Amy. I'm not sure how much they heard, but the point she was making is just how important the March 2nd deadline is. And oh, here, I'm going to actually just pass the phone over to her so she can be heard.
sorry about that. I just wanted to, this is Amy. I really wanted to add that it's not just about missing a deadline. It's forever excluding your students from the Cal Grant Entitlement Program. It's not if your senior misses it this year, oh, that's too bad, they can come back in a couple years and get it. The way the Cal Grant works is if you miss that March 2nd deadline, you have 1 year and you can apply for it. But after that period of time, you are forevermore excluded from the entitlement program. That window closes permanently. So we really want to emphasize that. We know the timelines for homeless youth and foster youth. It's not just lined up perfect like a little, nice, stable suburban family. Their lives are chaotic and they're hard. They're not following the same academic pattern, and they often, are going to take a little bit more time. But the way so there's very high stakes to missing this March 2nd deadline. It's not just about getting more money. It's about forever being excluded from the Cal Grant program. And we're working at John Burton Advocates for Youth to change that and to broaden that window. We feel like that's too high of stakes. But as the law is now, that is, you essentially are the main form of financial aid in California. $1.9 billion of the $2.1 billion Cal Grant budget goes to the entitlement program. Only $184 million is in the competitive pool. So when you miss participating in the entitlement program, you're really leaving a lot of young people behind. So I know I'm really emphasizing this, but we are just finding people don't understand that. They're hearing, okay, we missed the March 2nd deadline. That's too bad. We'll come back next year. There is no next year. It means that they will forevermore not get an entitlement grant. So even if you don't know if the young person is going to go to college, submit the FAFSA. There's absolutely no downside. So that's all the main point that I really want to communicate on this, because I didn't realize how high stakes this March 2nd deadline, particularly for seniors, is extremely important. And so I'm going to hand it back to Simone.
Thanks, Amy, for that really great takeaway from our webinar today. We want to make sure everyone leaves with that understanding. I'm going to move on to a question about award packages. And Marisol, maybe you want to take this one. It asks, is an award package developed by every campus that the student lists on the FAFSA?
Yes and no. So some schools can award students automatically, and some schools will not be able to award students automatically. If the student is selected for verification, then the student will have to bring documentation to the school for the school to award the student. But yes, the student can receive different award letters from different schools that the student applies to. However, the student can only get financial aid from one school.
Thank you. And there was a question about the about guardianship. So I'll just answer this one. It says, regarding the guardianship question, does a guardianship established in probate court count? Which, in clarifying the probate court versus, a guardianship dependent established in dependency court. So yes, for the purposes of the FAFSA, a guardianship established in probate court does count as a guardianship on the FAFSA. And okay, this is I'll pitch this to either of you. I don't know the answer to this question. Is there an appeal process? So if the financial aid administrator determines that, says, I am not determining the student as a homeless student, this student is not a homeless youth, we're not going to make this determination, can the student appeal that decision? Do either of you know?
Well, the only thing that I know is that the student will have to meet with the manager of the financial aid office, and then the manager can make a determination. If the student it's not content with the answer, the student's always welcome to go to the next person, in this case, the dean of student services.
In our situation, students, if they come in with that letter that's saying no, that they're not, then we're going to go with the letter. That's usually why we ask for the letter or whatever they may be bringing in to us. So from that point, what happens is they meet with our associate director, and if it comes back no, and there's, the student is still fighting, we usually have them meet with our VP, but it's still, if they say no, then the student's only going to be eligible for unsubsidized. We won't deny them aid, but they're only going to be eligible for the unsubsidized loan with us.
Okay, thanks both of you. That's really helpful. We have another question related to the Cal Grant. A lot of Cal Grant questions today. So sorry to those of you who are not here in California, but this question is about the GPA verification. There's actually, I have two related questions there. One is, how do you get schools to submit the GPA verification, particularly schools that are not like traditional high schools? And then the other question is just, how long does that process take, the GPA verification process? So we know that it needs to be in by March 2nd. So when is it too late to start? When should they be starting that? And I'll maybe Tanae, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. So with the GPA verification, if you have here within our county, so here within Kern County, we know for a fact our high school senior counselors submit their GPA electronically. If the student gets into a situation throughout California and their high school doesn't submit their GPA electronically for them, California Student Aid Commission, they do offer a GPA verification form. So the student is able to print the form off. They just go to FAFSAgov, print off the Cal Grant verification form, and they would take it into their high school or whatever counselor that they're working with so they can verify that GPA. Then they would have to mail that in to California Student Aid Commission. And I always tell students the earlier the better, because the application, the Cal Grant verification form, became available January 1st. So with Cal Grant, it always becomes available January 1st, and the priority deadline is March the 2nd.
Thank you, Tanae. And I know we're here at 11:30. I'm going to just take one more question, I think, or take a few more questions. And it looks like some people want to drop off, some people want to stay on. So those of you who want to stay on, we'll keep going for a few more minutes here. The next question was, how do we get a foster youth verification? Now, I know that we didn't cover this. This will be covered in the March webinar, but I want to cover this now so that the person asking has the information. So there are two ways that you can get the foster youth verification letter. If you're a current foster youth, you're instructed to get it from your county. And usually this would be going through your ILP program. So contacting an ILP coordinator and requesting that determination, that dependency letter. And they should very easily be able to produce that and get it to the student. If they have any issues getting that letter from their county, they're instructed to follow up with the California Department of Social Services to help to assist. Former foster youth can go to their county, or they can go to the California Department of Social Services. And there are specific, I think, phone numbers and email addresses, but I don't have them in my head off the top of my head. So what we'll do is there's an ACL that actually has all of that information, and I'll go ahead and send that in the follow-up materials so that you can get that those correct phone numbers and email addresses of the state. Okay, and then here's another question, and I know we covered this, I think, in the slides. I think Marisol covered this. The question is, does the FAFSA need a parent guardian signature if you are an independent student? Or does it need, I guess the first question is, does it need one at all for any student? And then does it need one if you're an independent student? So I'll let Marisol address that one, because I think you covered it in the presentation.
Yes, the students who are considered dependent, they do need a parent FAFSA ID. For those students, in this case, for foster youth, and if they consider homeless, they will not need a parental FAFSA ID. When students consider independent, the only signature required on the FAFSA is the student signature.
Thank you. Another Cal Grant question here. How many students get the Cal Grant C, which is the non-entitlement grant, the non-entitlement Cal Grant C? And actually our director happens to, because she's been working on policy related to this, happens to know these numbers off the top of her head, and she's telling me 10%, so only 1 in 10 get that Cal Grant C non-entitlement grant. And the next question is about Chafee. It says, can the student be enrolled and receive Chafee? Sorry, enrolled, I missed the word. Can they be enrolled in online courses and receive the Chafee? So we know that they have to be a qualified institution on that list. So yes, they can, technically speaking, if that school is one of the eligible Chafee institutions, then they can. But I would go to CSAC's website that we gave you the URL on the screen and look up the school to make sure that it's listed as an eligible institution. And let's see, how about this? This is another Cal Grant question. Does the amount that a student gets from the Cal Grant depend on their GPA? So the award amount, is that dependent on GPA? Tanae, do you want to take this one?
Yes, I can take that. So yes, because your Cal Grant A is going to be, I want to say yes and no, because your Cal Grant A falls into the category of a 3.0 or higher, and that amount, Cal Grant A is only going to be strictly fees. That does not have, Cal Grant A does not have the access portion to it, only has fee portion. And so when we award it within a CSU system, it's awarded just to cover that state university fee. And the same with Cal Grant B. If they're eligible for Cal Grant B and they receive the fee portion, it's going to do the same as A, just cover that tuition fee part. But the access, no, I mean, Cal Grant B, you just have to have the 2.0 or higher. Cal Grant A is 3.0 or higher. And again, fall within the, the EFC requirements for each of the, like Cal Grant A, like I said, has a higher EFC requirement with a higher GPA. Cal Grant B has a lower EFC requirement with a 2.0 or higher.
Okay. But if you have a higher GPA, you're not going to get like more money, like some sort of higher award. Okay, great.
Right, no.
Okay, and then a question for Marisol. Does the Cal Grant cover community college fees? So Marisol, can you just go over which Cal Grants can you can use at a community college, and do any of them cover community college fees? And maybe remind people about the FAFSA fee waiver, I would say.
Yes, so the Cal Grants that we have for the community college is Cal Grant B and Cal Grant C. Cal Grant B gives students about $1,800 per academic year, and Cal Grant C is about $1,000. Cal Grant C is for those students who are in a vocational or technical career in community college, and none of them covers tuition for community college. The grant or what covers tuition in community college is the fee waiver. It's the BOG, the fee waiver.
Thank you. I think we are, I'm looking at the time, we're at 11:37. I think we'll go ahead and end the webinar. I want to thank our panelists for their time. As you can imagine, they're extremely busy. They meet with students every day and have a lot of work to do. So I really appreciate both of you taking your time out to prepare for the webinar and to be on the webinar and answer the questions. And thanks so much to everyone for joining us today and participating. And I'll be sending out the follow-up materials later this afternoon. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Bye.